The mountains of Wyoming were cruel in autumn. Wind sharp enough to flay a man's skin. Sky heavy with gray that promised snow before long. In the hollow where the Hartwell place sat, silence hung thick as tar. Only the sound of horses shifting impatiently broke the stillness. Jedediah Hartwell, Jed to the few who dared call him anything, stood stiff as a fence post, his knotted hands gripping the head of his cane. Beside him, Martha Hartwell clutched her shawl around narrow shoulders, her gray hair whipped loose by the wind. Their children sat mounted, 3 riders framed against the horizon, the kind of sight Jed once thought would make him proud. But pride had bled out of him long ago. "Pa," Roy said, voice flat as a hammer on stone. "Ain't no sense in you two hangin' on here. Cabins fallin' and fields are dust. Winter'll kill you." Jed's jaw worked, but no words came. He saw Roy's hand resting lazy on the saddle horn, his back straight, eyes colder than the river in thaw. Caleb spat into the dirt. "We're done feedin' mouths too old to pull their weight. We got lives, Pa. Can't spend 'em nursin' ghosts." The youngest, Luella, didn't look at them. She kept her bonnet pulled low, lips pressed tight. Jed knew that look, shame, not pity. Martha's voice, thin but steady, carried between them. "We gave you everything we had. Every acre worked with blood. Every bite from our hands to yours. Is this how children answer?" Roy shrugged. "The world don't keep score, Ma. You're on your own now." He drew a leather pouch from his coat and tossed it into the dirt. A few coins clinked out, dull against the stones. Alms for beggars. But it wasn't the coins that broke Jed's heart. It was Caleb, grinning mean, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out the family's Bible. Its leather-worn, pages softened by decades of Martha's careful turning. He let it drop into the dust, spitting after it. "You'll need that more and we will." Jed's cane dug deep into the soil, as if he could pin himself upright against the shame. His face burned red, then white. "You ungrateful curs," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "Blood of mine, yet strangers to my soul." But his sons only wheeled their horses, Luella following silent. They rode down the trail without looking back, leaving only hoof prints and silence. Martha knelt, trembling hands brushing dirt from the Bible. She clutched it to her chest as though it were a living child. Jed bent stiffly to pick up the coins, stared at them in his palm, then flung them into the weeds. The cabin loomed behind them, a black skeleton against the dying sky. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and dust. Floorboards gaped wide enough for snakes to slide through. The hearth was choked with ash. Wind hissed through the cracks in the walls, carrying the voice of the mountain itself. Cold, merciless, uncaring. Martha took a broom, brittle with age, and began sweeping. Each stroke raised more dust than it cleared, clouding her face until she coughed raw. Jed lowered himself into the lone chair, wood creaking under his weight. His eyes roamed the beams overhead, half-rotted, sagging with age. "Ain't fit for a dog," he muttered. But Martha kept sweeping. Her shoulders shook, yet she moved with the stubborn rhythm of a woman who refused surrender. On the sill outside the cabin, tangled among stones, a withered rosebush clung to life. Its thorns were sharp, though its branches had long since turned gray. Martha's eyes found it as she opened a shutter to let in light. For a long time she stared at it, lips moving silently. Jed noticed. Best to tear it out. Ain't no use for dead things. She shook her head slowly. It bloomed once. It can bloom again. 2 days later, Martha walked the mile to town, shawl pulled tight, basket hooked on her arm. Jed refused to go, too proud to be seen scrounging. The general store smelled of tobacco and coffee beans. Women gathered near the counter fell silent when Martha stepped in. She laid 2 embroidered handkerchiefs on the counter, stitching fine though her fingers trembled. "For flour, if it pleases," she said softly. The storekeep looked at the cloths, then at her, lips twitching. "Ain't much market for pretty stitches, ma'am. Maybe half a pound." Behind her, younger women whispered. "Poor old bird, thinkin' lace'll keep her belly full." Laughter rose like knives. Martha kept her eyes lowered. She took the meager sack of flour and walked out slow, each step heavy as if dragging a chain. Outside, children pointed at her, singing a cruel rhyme about ghost folk up the mountain. Back at the cabin, she set the flour down. Jed looked at her hands, raw from carrying the basket, and said nothing. His silence stung sharper than words. That night, wind rattled loose boards. Jed sat by the hearth, cane across his knees. "They left us for dead," he said, voice cracking. "And maybe they're right." Martha sat beside him, Bible on her lap. She read no words, only rested her palm against its cover. "The world thinks us buried," she said, "but roots run deeper than the eye can see." Outside, the rosebush clawed at the wind. That first night after the children's departure, Jed lay awake listening to the rafters groan. Martha's breathing beside him was soft but unsteady, the wheeze of a woman worn thin by work and worry. Jed stared at the ceiling beams, black shapes etched against the faint glow of the hearth. His mind wandered back to younger days, when he returned from the war with strong arms and fire in his belly, when the land was rich with wheat, when his sons looked at him as though he were a hero. Now his bones ached. His hands shook when he tried to lift a rifle. The land he once tamed had grown wild again, reclaiming itself. His children had seen the truth he'd refused to name. He was an old man, closer to the grave than to glory. A bitter thought wormed in. Maybe they're right. Maybe the mountain will finish what the war left undone. He sat up, the urge strong to walk outside with the rifle and put an end to the humiliation. But when his eyes fell upon Martha, curled small beneath the quilt, hands clutched around that Bible, he froze. Her lips moved in her sleep, whispering words of prayer even in dreams. He lowered himself back onto the bed, his shame doubled. Ashamed of his weakness, ashamed of the darkness inside him. The sun rose pale and reluctant. Cold air drifted through gaps in the walls, carrying the smell of damp earth. Martha was already awake, kneeling before the hearth. She tried coaxing flame from wet wood, blowing until her cheeks flushed. Jed watched her shoulders shake with the effort. For years, she had risen before dawn to tend children, meals, lessons, and fields. Now, with no one left but him, she bore it all again. He pushed himself up, cane groaning under his weight. "Leave it, woman," he muttered. "The wood's too green." But she ignored him, striking flint against steel until sparks caught. Slowly, the fire took. Orange light spilled across her lined face. She exhaled a shaky laugh of triumph. Jed said nothing, though something inside him stirred. Guilt, perhaps, or awe that she still fought when he only thought of surrender. By the week's end, word had spread beyond town. A neighbor, young Tom Parlow, rode past their cabin with a load of hay. He slowed his horse just enough to call out, "Folks say winter'll eat you alive up here." Then he laughed and kicked on, dust rising from his horse's hooves. Martha, sweeping the porch, flushed red but kept her head bowed. Jed gripped his cane until his knuckles whitened. He longed to shout, to fire a shot in the air, but pride chained him to silence. That night he muttered by the fire, "Let him talk. Wolves don't listen to sheep." But his voice lacked conviction, and Martha only laid another log on the flame, saying nothing. One evening, Jed lowered himself into the chair, his one sturdy piece of furniture, only to feel it splinter beneath him. He fell hard onto the floorboards, cane clattering away. For a moment he lay stunned, staring at the cracked chair. Martha rushed to him, hands trembling, but he waved her off, more wounded in pride than flesh. "Even the woods turned on me," he growled. Martha crouched beside him, smoothing his gray hair. "Chairs break. Men don't. Not till the Lord calls them. Her words held no jest, no softness, only plain faith. Yet they steadied him more than if she'd wept. Later that night, after Martha had gone to bed, Jed stepped outside. The moon cast silver across the barren hillside. The cabin loomed dark behind him, windows like hollow eyes. He looked down at the rose bush, dead and thorny, clinging stubbornly to the earth. His instinct said to rip it out, clear space for something new. But he could not bring himself to do it. He crouched, joints aching, and touched one dry branch. To his surprise, it pricked his finger, drawing blood. He stared at the bead of red under the moonlight, a thorn drawing life from him, yet proving itself still sharp, still real. Behind him, the cabin creaked, a broken thing trying to stand. Before him, the rose stood, brittle but unyielding. For the first time in days, Jed's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something closer to grim respect. "Bloom or die," he muttered to the plant. "Same as us." He turned back toward the cabin. Inside, Martha slept with a Bible at her chest, her face calm as if she trusted the mountain itself to hold them. The fire still burned faintly in the hearth. The first snow came earlier than Jed remembered in his younger years. It fell thick and heavy, cloaking the cabin roof in white silence. At first Martha whispered, "Looks clean, don't it?" But beauty in the high country seldom lasted. 2 nights later, with wind keening down the ridge, Jed woke to a crash. The roof over the back room gave way under the snow's weight. Board split, dust and snow pouring through like a broken lung. Jed stumbled from bed, dragging his cane. His breath fogged in the frigid air. Martha stood in her nightdress, thin arms crossed over her chest, staring at the ruin with wide eyes. Jed wanted to curse, to rage, but all that came out was a rasp. "This shack's as tired as we are." He sank into a chair, head in hands. The thought struck again. One bullet could end the misery for both of them. He felt the rifles pull like a shadow at his back. But Martha, barefoot in the snow dust, bent down and began scooping broken boards into a pile. Her lips moved with words Jed couldn't hear. A prayer maybe, or only stubborn silence. He watched her hands, red with cold, moving with patient rhythm. Shame gnawed at him. He forced himself up, joints screaming, and fetched a hammer. They worked until dawn, patching the hole with what lumber they had. The cabin still leaked, but smoke rose from the chimney again. By Christmas, the flour Martha had bartered was near gone. She baked what little remained into a loaf no bigger than her palm. She set it on the table between them. The crust was blackened, the inside dense and bitter. Jed chewed slowly, each bite tasting of ashes. "Better than nothing," Martha said, though her eyes watered as she swallowed. Jed slammed his fist on the table, startling her. A man ought to feed his wife better than this. Silence stretched. His anger was not at her, but at himself, yet the words hung sharp in the air. Martha reached across, laying her hand over his gnarled one. "You've given me more than bread, Jed Hartwell. You've given me your years." He stared at her hand, the skin thin, veins like river lines yet steady. Slowly his shoulders eased. January nights brought wolves. Their howls curled through the timber, echoing across the frozen hollow. One night the pack crept close. Yellow eyes gleamed beyond the fence, teeth flashing white. The Hartwells had only a scrawny goat left. Its terrified bleats cut through the dark. Jed took his rifle, hands trembling. He stepped onto the porch, Martha behind him with a lantern. His vision blurred, breath ragged, but he aimed and fired into the night. The shot cracked like thunder. The wolves scattered, shadows melting into the trees. Silence fell again, except for the frantic hammer of Jed's heart. He lowered the rifle, chest heaving. His hands shook so badly the gun clattered to the porch boards. Martha picked it up gently, as though handling not just iron but the weight of his shame. She set it back inside, her voice soft. You kept us safe. Jed wanted to believe her. In early spring, Martha walked to town again, this time with a bundle of needlework. Delicate stitches she'd done by firelight until her eyes burned. She laid them on the counter of the general store. For seed, she whispered. The storekeep looked at the cloth, then smirked. Ain't worth near a packet. He slid her a handful of half-rotted seed as if it were charity. Behind her, a gaggle of younger women laughed. She'll be plantin' rags instead of corn, one said. Martha held her head high, though her ears burned. She gathered the seed and walked out, not stopping until she was alone on the trail. Then she sank to her knees in the dust and wept silently, seeds spilling through her fingers like tears. When she reached the cabin, Jed said nothing, only gathered the seeds and pressed them back into her palm. We'll plant 'em, he said. Rotten or not. They dug into the frozen earth with hands blistered raw. Weeks passed with no sign of life. Then, one damp morning, Martha found a single green shoot pushing through the soil. Her cry of joy startled Jed. She knelt, cupping the fragile sprout as if it were a child. Tears ran down her face, cutting clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. Jed looked down at her, at the life springing from the dead ground, and felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. Hope. That same week, Jed found an old axe head buried under junk in the shed. Rust ate its surface, the handle long rotted away. He spent 2 days grinding it against stone, Martha at his side sharpening the edge with whetstone when his arms tired. He carved a new handle from hickory. When at last he swung it into a log, splitting wood clean, Martha clapped her hands and laughed. Jed's chest swelled. His arms trembled, yes, but strength still lived in them. That night, Martha's hands bled from stitching. Jed noticed her wince as she tried to sew by firelight. Without a word, he took her hands in his, rough palms wrapping gentle around her wounds. He bound them in strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. Neither spoke. The fire crackled, shadows dancing on their faces. For the first time in months, silence felt like comfort, not emptiness. Later, Martha hummed an old hymn. Jed sat back, eyes closed, letting her voice wash over him like balm. By late spring, something shifted outside the cabin. Martha rose one morning and gasped softly. The rosebush, which had lain gray and brittle all winter, bore a faint green at its base. Tiny shoots pushed out, stubborn against the odds. She knelt, fingers brushing the new life. A smile broke across her face, rare and radiant. When Jed came outside, she pointed. Told you, Jed. Roots don't give up easy. He stared at the small leaves, and for the first time since his children left, he felt ashamed of doubting her. Word spread through the valley. Folks whispered that the Hartwells were still alive, still fighting. Some mocked. Old fools clinging to dust. Others began to soften. Children from the village started leaving eggs at their gate. Once, a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth appeared on their porch, no note attached. Martha accepted each gift with quiet grace. Jed grumbled, but deep down he knew it meant the world. They were not as alone as they thought. One evening, after planting, Jed stood beside Martha on the porch. The sky blazed crimson with sunset. Smoke rose from the repaired chimney, steady for the first time in years. Below them, the first sprouts of potatoes greened the earth. The rosebush stood taller, bearing leaves that caught the dying light. Jed reached for Martha's hand. She gave it without looking, their fingers weaving together like roots in the soil. The cabin still groaned with age, the land still hard, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like a home. The thaw came slow, the mountain streams swollen with meltwater. Jed and Martha worked their little plot daily, bent against the wind, planting potatoes, corn, beans. Each seed carried a prayer point one afternoon. As Martha hung laundry on the line, she noticed a rider on the far ridge. The figure sat tall in the saddle, black hat against the pale sky. He lingered a long while, watching the cabin, before turning his horse and vanishing into the trees. Martha told Jed that night by the fire. His brow furrowed. "Ain't no hunter I know sits his horse like that." They both knew. Their land, though poor, still held water rights, a creek that cut through the hollow. That made it valuable. Within a week, the man returned, this time riding down the trail. He was not alone. 2 hired guns flanked him, eyes cold, rifles easy in their hands. He dismounted before the cabin. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a hawk-like face, he tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Jedediah Hartwell," he drawled. "Name's Silas Kane. I own near half this valley. Thought I'd ride out and meet my neighbors." Jed leaned heavy on his cane, saying nothing. Martha stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've met us now." Kane's smile was thin. "I'll speak plain. This here patch you're scratching on, hard soil, true, but that creek flows straight into my pasture. I aim to consolidate. I'll buy it off you, fair price." Jed's jaw clenched. "Ain't for sale." Kane studied him, eyes like glass. "You'd rather die scrabbling in the dirt?" Jed's voice was iron. "Better dirt than chains." Kane's smile faded. He mounted up. "Think it over. Old age makes a body foolish. Don't let it make you dead." Dust rose behind him as he rode off. Soon, when Martha walked to town, she felt eyes follow her. Some folks avoided her gaze, others whispered. Kane's influence ran deep. He had money, power, men in his pocket. At the general store, a neighbor muttered under his breath, "Ain't wise to cross Silas Kane." Martha held her chin high, but fear pressed heavy on her chest. She hurried home, clutching the small sack of salt she'd bartered, her steps quick against the dust. A week later, Jed went to draw water from the creek. He found it muddied, fouled with dead brush and carcasses of small animals. Upstream, he spotted Kane's men dumping waste from a wagon. Rage burned in him, but his body betrayed him. His legs shook, his chest ached. He staggered back to the cabin, face pale with fury. "They mean to poison us out," he rasped. Martha gripped his arm. "Then we'll dig our well deeper." Her voice was steady, though inside she trembled. That night, dogs barked down the valley. Then came footsteps crunching gravel. The Hartwells woke to find a message nailed to their door. A dead crow, wings splayed, beak split open. Beneath it, carved into the wood, "Leave." Martha gasped, covering her mouth. Jed tore it down, jaw tight, but his hands shook long after. Where once neighbors left gifts at their gate, now silence fell. Fear of Cain made cowards of good people. One man, Elias Turner, avoided Jed in town, eyes averted. "Ain't personal," he muttered, "but Cain's got men watchin'. Best you sell, old friend." Jed spat in the dirt. "Best I don't." But each such encounter cut deeper than a blade. In late summer, smoke woke Martha. She stumbled outside to see flames licking at the barn. Jed limped after her, coughing. Together, they hauled water, beating at the fire with wet sacks. The blaze roared, devouring dry timbers. At last, the roof collapsed in a storm of sparks. They sank in the dirt, faces blackened, chests heaving. Inside, the goat lay dead, their tools charred, feed reduced to ash. Martha pressed her face into her hands. "Jed, they'll take everything." Jed's voice, hoarse but fierce, cut through. "Not while I still draw breath." Days later, a stranger rode up, Jonah McBride, a trapper who had seen the fire from afar. He sat with them by the ruined barn, chewing tobacco. "Cain's been squeezing folks up and down this valley," Jonah said. "Ain't just you, but most bend the knee. You too different." Martha studied him. "Why tell us this?" Jonah spat into the dirt. 'Cause once, Cain tried the same with me. Took my land. I been waitin' for someone with the grit to stand. He left them with a sack of dried venison, a gift wordless but heavy with meaning. For the first time, Jed felt less alone. One evening, Cain himself returned. He dismounted slow, boots crunching gravel, and strode to the porch. Still standin', his eyes swept the burnt barn. Stubbornness don't make a crop grow. Martha stepped forward before Jed could speak. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. You'll not scare us off, Mr. Cain. This is our home. These roots go deeper than your money ever will. For a moment, Cain's eyes narrowed. He studied her, as if weighing the measure of her spirit. Then he chuckled, low and cold. You've got fire, missus. But fire burns out. He tipped his hat, turned, and left. Jed, watching Martha's shoulders stiff, felt a fierce pride. She had stood taller than him that day. That summer, against all odds, the rose bush bloomed. Its crimson flowers burst bright against the gray walls of the cabin, petals soft as silk. Martha wept when she saw them. Jed stood silent, hand on her shoulder, eyes glistening. Even Cain's shadow could not dim that sight. It was proof. Life could still rise from ruin. One evening, as twilight painted the hollow, Jed sat whittling on the porch while Martha tended the roses. From the ridge, a distant gunshot echoed. They froze, listening. Silence followed, heavy and watchful. The threat was closer now, its presence woven into every dusk, every shadow. Yet the roses bloomed red, defiant against fear. Jed whispered, almost to himself. Let him come. Martha, without looking up, replied. We'll still be here. By late autumn, the mountain carried a strange stillness. The air smelled sharp, metallic, as if waiting for blood. Martha felt it when she fetched water, when she kneeled in the dirt to tend the last of the beans. Jed felt it when he sharpened the old axe. Its blade nicked and scarred like his own hands. Cain's men had not been seen for a fortnight, but absence was not safety. It was the kind of silence that came before thunder. One night, wind rattled the shutters like skeletal fingers. Martha lay awake, staring at the rafters, whispering prayers into the dark. Jed sat on the edge of the bed, rifle across his knees. Neither spoke. Words would have broken the fragile calm they clung to. The next morning, hoofbeats thundered down the trail. Cain himself rode at the front, flanked by 6 armed men. Dust billowed behind them like storm clouds. They halted before the cabin. Martha stood on the porch, face pale but unflinching. Jed stepped beside her, Cain in one hand, rifle in the other. Cain's smile was cruel. Last chance, old man. Take my offer, walk away. Live what years you got left. Stay, and I'll burn this shack to ash, with you in it. Jed's voice came slow, steady, carrying across the hollow. This land ain't for sale. Not now. Not ever. Martha added, softly but firmly. You'll have to kill us to take it. Cain's smile faded. He spat into the dirt. So be it. That night, they came. Torches flared in the dark, shadows moving through the trees. A shot rang out, splintering the porch rail. Jed fired back, the crack of his rifle echoing down the valley. Martha dragged buckets of water to the walls, ready for flame. Bullets chewed the cabin's logs. The air filled with smoke, screams of men, the smell of gunpowder. Jed's arms trembled under the rifle's recoil, but his aim held steady. 2 of Cain's men fell in the brush. Martha, though untrained, moved like instinct. She pressed cloth against Jed's arm when a bullet grazed him, whispered prayers between the cracks of gunfire. Her faith was no shield, but it was steel in the blood. The attackers pulled back before dawn, leaving silence and smoke. The cabin walls bore holes like scars. Their food stores had been set alight. A goat lay dead, struck by a stray round. Jed slumped against the hearth, blood seeping through his shirt. Martha knelt beside him, hands trembling but firm as she bound the wound. "Don't you leave me now," she whispered. "Not after all this." Jed met her eyes. In them he saw not fear but fierce love, carved from decades of struggle. "I'll not leave," he rasped. "Not while you stand." A week later, Cain returned with more men, determined to end it. They came with dynamite, shouting, jeering, certain of victory. But the Hartwells were ready. Jonah McBride, the trapper, had returned, bringing 2 rifles and his own steady hands. Together, the 3 of them fought like cornered wolves. When Cain's men tried to set fire to the roof, Martha doused them with boiling water. When they charged the door, Jed swung his axe, eyes blazing. Jonah's bullets dropped 2 more. The battle raged through the night. Finally, when the eastern sky paled, Cain himself strode forward, revolver drawn. Cain and Jed faced each other in the clearing. The years fell away. The war veteran against the land baron, both carved by time, but driven by will. "You're a relic," Cain snarled. "This land belongs to men with power." Jed straightened, leaning hard on his cane. His voice thundered like the mountain itself. "This land belongs to those who love it." Cain raised his revolver. The shot cracked. Jed staggered, but did not fall. With a roar, he swung the axe. Steel bit deep. Cain's cry split the dawn before silence claimed him. The Baron of the Valley lay still, his shadow broken. His men fled, their courage shattering without him. Jed collapsed, blood soaking his shirt. Martha cradled him on the earth, sobbing prayers into his chest. But he lived, barely. Neighbors who had once turned their backs arrived by midday, drawn by the sound of battle. Seeing Cain dead, they rallied. Jonah spoke for all. "These 2 held fast when the rest of us bent. This land's theirs, by right eternal." Hands once timid now carried timber's tool seed. Where fear had ruled, respect now grew. Seasons turned. The barn was rebuilt, stronger than before. The creek ran clear again, untainted. Crops flourished. Neighbors came often, trading, sharing, helping. And by the cabin wall, the rosebush spread, blooming brighter each year, crimson petals against rough-hewn logs. Martha tended it daily, whispering to it as though it were kin. Jed, though slower now, sat beside her, eyes soft with something close to peace. What had been a ruin was no longer. It was a haven, a garden carved from pain. Years later, travelers passing through the hollow spoke of the Hartwell place. They said an old couple lived there, their love written into every board of the cabin, every furrow of the earth. They said no one dared challenge them again. Not after Cain. On summer evenings, when the sun bled gold across the valley, one could see them sitting side by side on the porch. Behind them, roses climbed high, red as blood, bright as life. A cabin once broken, now a paradise. A love once tested, now eternal.